And they have microphones. All right. But I'm going to start by asking or introducing our panelists and then allowing them to launch into lively conversation. So the panelists represent the researchers who participated in our call for papers and were awarded prize money. We had our first able to fund some travel stipends and some awards in recognition of the hard work that goes into when I went back to school to get my PhD, I thought it was going to be a cakewalk like my master's. I can tell you they actually make you work for a PhD, was what I was able to verify. So I now really appreciate the effort that they put into preparing papers for this conference. So our first panelist is Lauren Bales, and she is a doctoral candidate at The Ohio State University, just accepted a tenure track position at the University of Delaware. She'll be presenting her empirical study into homeschoolers and political efficacy tomorrow. Professor Dr. Ingo Richter from Germany, very distinguished law professor who presented a policy paper and was also an award winner. Dr. Philippe Bongrand from France also received a travel stipend. He is launching a very one of the first and very expansive research study into the homeschool movement as it is emerging in France, as I understand it. Albert Cheng, who's at the University of Arkansas, who is he's a doctoral candidate, and he's already published studies about homeschooling in the Journal of School Choice, presenting another paper here that will be submitted to the Journal of School Choice, I'm assuming and hoping. And finally, Dr. Aaron Saiger, whose paper won our top award. Albert's won our runner-up, and Dr. Sager's was our top award. He is a widely published author with a forthcoming book on, what is the title of your book?
It changes every day.
Okay.
Right now it's Schoolhouse in the Clouds. I'm worried that Dr. Mitra has stolen mine.
Okay. So he's also in. Yes, so that's coming out from, I think, Oxford Press, correct? Yes, he's at Fordham University, is a law professor there. So, and Sugata Mitra needs no introduction. He was just really expanded and blew our world wide open into possibilities. So, and joining us in the front here are some of our other researchers. If other researchers wander in and find us, I'll invite them to sit in the front. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you folks, because I know you have no problem raising questions and commenting. Found that out yesterday. But I'd ask you to direct your questions to Sugata so that we can get a conversation going. Thank you. Who wants to start?
A naive and provocative question. Why do we need empirical research on homeschooling? Homeschoolers are so convinced of what they do. They don't need empirical research. They do it anyway. So do you do research for us, the others who are not homeschooling, or for the politicians? So what is the aim?
Yeah, it's okay. No, so I am actually completely with you. But I'll tell you something interesting, that up to about 4 years ago, I would have immediately countered by saying that science has to proceed with evidence. You cannot take the next step without evidence. But remember, I'm saying I would have said this 4 or 5 years ago. Then I started to get criticized. The criticism was of two forms. You know, all this, what I was telling you about the different results, it got criticized on these grounds. Ground number one, sample sizes are too small. So what does it mean, etc. You need to do longitudinal studies over 20,000 people before you can state a conclusion. So then I thought, but I don't have the money to do that. I don't have the time to do that. So does it mean it shouldn't be done? The second point of criticism was that not only are the sample sizes wrong, but you are not using the standard research procedures of social science. And that one really got me because I had no clue what the standard research things are. You know, I mean, I know from my subject, physics, that if you want to do an experiment, you design it your way, and you design the measurement instruments your way, and then you do the measurement. So I was really confused with the question that you asked. Why should I do these studies? Why am I wasting my time doing these small sample studies? Until Professor Nicholas Negroponte of MIT, he blew the whole thing apart because he went on stage at a really big conference and he said that impact that needs to be measured is not worth measuring. That impact must be so massive that there is no need to measure anything. So then I thought, well, okay, so in that case, what does it mean? Is the message going through? So I think the answer to your question is that yes, if homeschoolers around the world are happy with what they're doing, and you have to be brutally frank about the answer. You must say what's inside your mind. Do you have a doubt? If you do not have a doubt, and if there are enough of you, a study can only hint at the same thing, whatever you are saying, and nothing else. So anyway, I'll end my answer with saying that does it mean that we shouldn't do any studies? No. But our research questions need to be different. Not about is homeschooling good or bad, should homeschooling be allowed or not allowed. Those questions are answered. You all know the answer. So there's not much research that's needed there.
Oh, this is Sugata's reserved mic, personal mic.
Looks like.
Yeah. So I'll make the case of why we do need it. Okay. So it turns out in the social science, empirical research, policy making world, and this is especially the case in the United States, that empirical research is the currency by which people are convinced. Okay. So sure, you know, we all here might be friendly towards homeschooling. We observe our homeschooling children do very well, and we kind of convince ourselves, yeah, that does work for us. But to the skeptic, they could raise all sorts of other objections, right? How do you know it wasn't something else that you did that caused the kid to be more successful? So we do need to do so. Good or bad, whether you like it or not, policymakers want empirical evidence, and so we have to go there. So let me just draw another analogy. So in medical research, okay, this is kind of where the way people think, policymakers think. So in medicine, right? How do we know if a drug or a treatment works, right? The American Medical Association and other types of professional associations, they have these standards for their research. So they take a drug, they treat it to, they divide a sample into 2 or 3 groups. They give one group the drug, one group gets nothing, and then one group gets like a fake placebo pill, right? And they randomly assign who gets the drug, and then they look at results, and that's how they know if the drug actually does anything. So, look, for better or for worse, we live in this modern world where science kind of is king. Although, of course, I think we all have our personal, we have limits to how far we think, the questions science can answer. But in terms of policy, the way the world is now, the only way you're going to convince, policymakers and other intellectuals and academics is through empirical proof, as is the case in medicine.
You've got a mic right here, and then if anybody in the front wants to participate, just go grab the mic.
I'm not that sure that home educators would be convinced by what Dr. Mitra have just shown and told in the lecture, because I found that in the presentation you made, the parents were not very present, and you had some critical thought about curricula, And I had the impression that for home educators here, curricula are not something to throw out. And so thinking about that, I was wondering if you had made research or were interested in working on the acceptability and the reaction and the behaviors from society, from different groups of society, from home educators, as far as your proposals are concerned. Because I thought that research could be interesting to understand home education when it deals not with the home educators, but with the non-home educators and how they behave towards these ideas. And my general question is about the acceptability and the possibility for your ideas to be appropriated, to circulate among different groups, and home educators would be one of these groups. And so I think it would worth making research about this reaction and the relationships towards such ideas. And the home educators would be an interesting field, I would think. So it.
Yeah, I'm actually quite familiar with the kind of thing that you're talking about, and I have two problems with it. One problem is, and it's my problem really, is that if you really wanted to do a study of curriculum, I can't do it. No individual can. It has to be a huge government-sponsored, etc., etc. The second thing is, what was this large evidence-based study based on which the existing curriculum exists? I'd like to see that. Okay, what was the evidence-based data based on which Montessori did her work, and why is it spread throughout the world? So I get puzzled. So maybe we've got a problem when we equate things like measurements in astronomy with measurements in education. In education, what seems to drive the whole thing is the perception of the educator towards what's happening. So if you look at SOLs, self-organized learning environments, when I first published in a pretty rotten journal, because all the other journals were rejecting the stuff, when I first published the results done in one small school with a small number of children, and I wrote very clearly that yes, I know this is a very small sample. All it's saying is that there is a direction we need to investigate further, which is this whole idea of self-learning. What happened next took me completely by surprise. Teachers in England started to practice it in their classrooms. And then they talked to each other. And then I started going to Europe, and the teachers in Europe started practicing. Then to United States, and when United States moves, it moves like King Kong. It's thousands of schools, thousands of teachers, everybody trying it, more or less the way I had said, but with some variations. And then it just went viral. And a student of mine tracked it, not using any scientific method, but using Twitter, to say how many references to souls are there in Twitter, and he plotted it on a world map. And it had gone completely viral. So then I thought, well, now what am I going to say? I mean, what am I going to measure next? Because if everybody is doing it, then it's already happening anyway. So that's when Negroponte saved the day by saying that if the impact is massive, then why are you trying to measure anything? It's got to work. Whatever it is, it's working. So when it comes to things like the curriculum, my objection is that an unsupported, unjustified, ancient curriculum cannot be changed without evidence-based study. That seems to be a contradiction in terms there. So why can't we just look at each piece, sit down together, and it could be homeschoolers, it could be non-homeschoolers, it could be all of us. The internet allows you to do it globally. Take each piece and say, do we need this? Do I need my child to learn this? Decide and drop it or keep it. That's one bit, and I'll finish with just one other, which is the trouble with curricular change of what is important and what is not is not always based on scientific fact. It's based on feelings. How can you take this out of the curriculum? You know, and particularly I get butchered for saying take out reading, take out writing. So I say it purposely just to see what the reaction would be. And as you saw, that I don't actually say take it out. I'm saying subsume it inside a bigger topic, which is communication. So, but still, I mean, reading, writing and arithmetic are the pillars of the education system. When it is clearly the pillars of a clerk-making system. It's the clerks of the 19th century who needed these skills. So that's the kind of trouble you face when you try to, you know, change curriculum, if that answers your question partially. Is there room for research? Yes, there is. I'll tell you where that research is. I didn't get a chance in the talk because I ran out of time. I think a curriculum should be made of not the things we know, but the big things that we don't know. And that will make the curriculum intensely interesting for all learners. If you say, here are the big unknowns of our time. Because anyway, to study a big unknown, you'll need to dig down to all the things you know. So you don't have to make a huge long list of everything you know. You just make a simple thing, make a simple question and say this is a big unknown. To give you an example, what is time? We don't know. 2000 years of physics hasn't been able to answer that question. We don't know what time is. But if you research that, you'll run into a huge curriculum of astrophysics and so on and so forth. So that needs researching. Is that a practical idea? What would happen if we did it? How many questions? Are all subjects amenable to such questions? Are there emotive issues that people, are there questions that we are not allowed to ask, etc.?
Does this work? So to my mind, it's a pleasure to be in a room with critics of educational research for a change. but the biggest mistake is the confusion of values and methods. The questions in education are much more about values than they are recognized to be by the research establishment. And so one thing that this group is very clear on is parents are entitled to want different things. So one of the reactions that I had listening to Dr. Mitra is, I want my child to read Japanese without the help of her device. I don't want the app designer to decide what the words mean. I want her to be able to do it herself. But that's a question of what I value. It's not a question of whether your method works or my method works. It's a question about wanting different things. And researchers constantly make this mistake of behaving as if what we want is either widely shared or obvious when it's neither. That's got to be wrong. At the same time, once you can, if you design the research enterprise to say, if you want X, how do you get there? Then research is a useful thing. Even there, the second problem is that you're very unhumble about research. I think Albert mentioned drug tests, and we have this terrible method in the States. I don't know about here, where the test to market a drug is so restrictive that it kills tens of thousands of people a year because we won't allow the marketing of a drug until it's proven to be both safe and effective. So if you're not sure if it's safe and you're not sure it's effective, but it is, but you're not sure, people die in the meantime. To my mind, the closest analogy we have is actually environmental science, where you have a complicated ecology that we do not understand. And so even if you're thinking about means, you have to be humble. You have to recognize that all of the interactions are not understood, that you're always omitting variables. But nevertheless, the environmental scientists have shown us some things that were not obvious. And I do think that in the education context also, research has the potential to show us things that are not obvious. I am not a homeschooler, but just as a parent, I know that there are things that I did systematically poorly as a parent, and if I had known better, it would have been good to know, as long as I could tell that what the person was telling me was not what I should value, but how to get to the things that I valued. So that's the area in which I would like us to operate. I don't think it's the area in which most educational researchers operate, but I would be happy to operate in that arena going forward.
Thank you. I am doing a research now. I'm from Colombia in South America. and I studied a master's in education and new technologies. So when I was here, all the panelists, I was thinking that I'm a mother of 3 kids, of 3 children, and I am homeschooling too. So when I started my research, at the same time, I decided to homeschool my kids. So I think all this experience, in my experience personally and professionally, this is like a matter of be so courageous, because first I got a lot of resistance to do that research. Actually, at the university, I studied with 200 educators from schools, from public schools, and everybody was doing bullying to me. Nobody talking to me. Everybody was saying, "You're crazy, really crazy that you are gonna homeschool your kids." And I said, no, I was feeling as a mother, as a researcher, as a person, that that was the way. So I talked with teachers, professors that I had. Many professors didn't believe in the research. They challenged me and they said, you have to confirm if that is true, and that's the challenge. Go, talk, look if in some countries work. We don't know if in Colombia works. Actually, a professor said to me, you are crazy in front of many people. She said, this is crazy, you are against the schools, and we are teachers. And I said, no, it's not against you. It's a reality, It is a reality. In our country, 2,000 families, 1,500 families are doing this. So that for me, it was like a matter of courageous and said, this is an opportunity to research. And I tell you this because I think we are here, many parents, many people that can be like a synergy for this. I think we have to do research. Actually, the social research, it could be even stronger because of the perceptions, the feelings. And I think also that public schools are looking to integrate families into the system, but we have the opportunity to integrate the knowledge in our families. So I think it really is an opportunity for us, for everybody, to still doing research. Okay.
This is Dr. Luciana Barbosa. Luciana Barbosa is a professor of education here in Brazil. She also was one of our prize recipients.
Thank you. And Timothy will help me with the English.
Good morning.
Em sua fala, anterior, você mostrou algumas fotos de como a escola era e ainda é.
In your former speech, you showed some images about how schools were and still are
Organizada para preparar as pessoas para a fábrica.
organized to prepare people for the factories.
Essa nova proposta, no fundo, não seria também reconhecer que hoje precisamos de uma nova forma de aprender?
This new proposal, wouldn't it be, in the end, recognizing that there needs to be a new form of learning?
Para por que precisamos trabalhar em novo mercado, para ter habilidades que o novo
because we need new sets of skills that the work market demands from us?
Me ficou mal-estar de que talvez a preocupação maior da proposta seja uma nova preparação para o que o novo mercado de trabalho exige.
Sort of a bad feeling inside of me was that maybe this is another way to prepare people for the work market,
The
new work market.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't wish away the work market because your child's got to live. So there has to be the potential to earn. The only difference between then and now is that then you couldn't carry what you needed for your work in any, well, for the lack of a better word, exobiological method. You couldn't carry it outside of your body, so it had to be inside your head. So if you take the example of, say, navigation, you carried what you could, which is that you carried the astrolabe, the thing with which you measure the altitude of stars, and you carried an almanac, which gave you the times and things, because you could not memorize it. It was too big to memorize. So those two things you had to carry. But the math, that you were taught. So you knew enough trigonometry to work out the rest of it. Now you don't need to do any of that. You have to basically say, Siri, where am I? And it will do the rest of it. So what does that mean in terms of preparing the child for the job market is the ability to acquire a skill whenever needed, as opposed to all the possible skills that you should know a little bit of, so that if you need them, you can pull them out of your head. That's the big change. And the assessment system has to then look for that, rather than look for how much you can keep inside your head. So I don't know if this is making sense, but a lot of mathematics, for example, it seemed to me, people will describe certain mathematical processes as beautiful. Say calculus, beautiful subject. And then I believe that also. But eventually it's just a process. When you say integral of this, that, and you look at that and you say, my God, it looks like, it looks like some strange language. It looks like whoever is doing it is a magician. But what it is doing is it's measuring the area under a curve. That's where calculus comes from. Why has that whole structure been evolved? Because it took too long to plot that curve. So Newton, Descartes, they invented this beautiful, brilliant method that you don't need to draw the graph. Here, you can do it with integration. We don't need that anymore. Hey Siri, what's the area under that graph? So that's what you have to teach the child. That how do you get to it quickly?
I'd like to make a comment, and then I've got a question for you. I'm Brian. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so first of all, you mentioned the basics of the 3 R's, the traditional. So I was thinking, and I think that the modern home education movement and what came before that, before 1900, basically proves to us that whether you agree with children need to know the 3 R's, reading, writing, math, or not, it can be learned in maybe an hour or two per day by the time you're about 10 years old or 12 years old anyway. So the filling time of institutional school is, in a sense, irrelevant to that anyway. So we might even just agree on all that. It's like, it doesn't matter. You could do it and it could be over with, and that's one good argument for not needing institutional schools, first of all. But now I have a question for you. So, and this is on the research matter. And this is something I've faced with as an objective researcher, but a homeschool dad of 8 children for 30-some years. And the negative critics of either home education or the alleged critics of research on homeschooling, because they might want to be a critic of homeschool research, but some of them are actually critics of homeschooling. Mm-hmm. Is it better to know something that's imperfect about a topic like homeschooling, or is it better to know nothing? So that's a question for you, a research question. Is it better to know something that was the imperfect study, or is it better to know nothing? Because some of the negative critics of the research would say it's better to know nothing.
Yeah, but I cannot subscribe to that view. Although inside my mind, my own formal education tells me the right answer is better to know nothing rather than to know half of it. But why am I not saying that? Is because I've worked inside communities where they have no schooling at all. And if I go to the government and say, can't we do something about it? The government says, until we can have a primary school according to the norms of the government, you cannot have a school. So I say, you mean that they should have nothing at all until they get the perfect school? And the government says yes. And there are children who just don't go to school as a result. So that's when my whole work started. I said, okay, I'm just going to drop the internet into the middle of that whole thing and see what happens. So I've changed my answer.
One more thing on that. That's sort of been what's been criticized to me. It's not the perfect study, Brian, so we can't consider it.
Yeah.
We really don't know anything about homeschooling because you haven't done the perfect study. But Albert's going to do one. Over there.
There are some studies that are so bad that they are worse than nothing. And there are some studies which are not perfect, but better than nothing. So I resist the binary on this. Can I ask Dr. Mitra a different question, if that's okay? Which is, I have so many things, I'll stick to one. Your photos are different than the rest of the photos we saw at this conference because there are so few adults. And I'm wondering if you feel critical of the homeschooling model in the sense that it is much more focused on the role of the parent than the systems that you're talking about, in which the rooms are full of children in larger numbers than many families, and have many fewer adults than the average homeschooling environment, namely zero, as far as I can tell, or an occasional drop-in from your grandmother cloud.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a brilliant question. I was hoping that this is the question I'll get asked eventually inside the conference.
I'm glad to be predictable.
So the thing is that, no, I mean, first of all, my information about homeschooling is not very high. I've known about homeschooling. I know many homeschoolers, but I haven't actually studied it as a process. But a few things struck me. Like, you saw that little film about the funding organization which we saw and there's this mother, and she's obviously doing homeschooling, but she's kind of teaching science with a blackboard, and there's her daughter sitting in front of her with their dog next to them, you know. So, and I'm thinking, but where are her friends? Has anybody asked her if she wants to learn physics from her mom? So I don't know. Maybe the answer is yes, but I don't know. So this did go through my mind, and also I have in my own childhood, from what little I remember, been surrounded by uncles, aunts, fathers, mothers, everybody being terribly helpful, you know. And I remember I used to hate it, and I used to think, I wish they wouldn't help me so much. You know? So, and that kind. So yes, coming back to the question, to be serious about it, I think if I had to say something to the homeschooling community, I'd say, where are all the children? You know, because for better or worse, that obsolete schooling institution, the one thing that it does do is brings them all together. You know, and there's my favorite story of a couple of years ago. There was flooding in England, and the schools were closed for 3 days, and the BBC was interviewing children. So on the first day, they interviewed this child, and this child is saying, "Lovely, I hope it keeps on flooding for the next month," she said, "so I don't have to go to school." So then about three days it lasted, and then on the third day, they're interviewing her, and she said, "It's so boring." So the BBC then says, "So it means you like school?" She says, "Yes, of course I like school. All my friends are there." So, you know, that piece, I think, is your biggest challenge. And you cannot do that electronically. It has to be shoulder to shoulder. It used to be there in all our societies. If you just look back, there used to be a time when you could drop into somebody's house without making a phone call because there was no phone. So, and he just walked in, and then, and this other guy said, "Oh my God, did you have to come at this time?" But anyway, all the kids got together. That kind. I don't know if you can think of a way, a 21st century equivalent of how that can be done, because that will transform things. One of the things I'm trying, three of the schools in the cloud that I have in India, they're community based. They're not inside schools. They're in the middle of the street, so to speak. And they're beautiful looking places. They look like, a first class lounge in the middle of nowhere, big screens, fast internet, solar power, etc., etc. And then I tell the mothers, isn't this a nice place to send your child to? Because the mothers are not educated. They don't understand what I'm trying to do. But it's always full of children. And then I realized, okay, so I can get all the children here without it being a school. And then I can ask them the big questions, which is what I do. That I or my other researchers, they go in there and they say, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And why is it dark at night, or something like that. And the children start. My problem is the mothers, particularly the mothers, don't understand. So there's a mother who says to me, "My daughter is speaking in English." So I said, "Is that a complaint?" So she says, no, I wanted her to learn how to speak English, but she is speaking in English. Who taught her? So I said, nobody did. You saw there was. So she said, but you can't learn anything without teachers. So I said, well, you saw it with your own eyes with your daughter. She's speaking in English. No, she talks to those ghosts on those screens. She's talking about Skype. Calls them ghosts in the screen. So my daughter is learning from ghosts. So, there is that world. I'm telling you the story only to remind you that it's very easy to get yourselves into this position of, this society out here in the middle of urban Brazil or urban anything, and we take everything for granted. But out there are, a billion people, a billion others who believe this.
So I was hoping to return to our discussion of curriculum for just a moment, and I think I'm in a safe audience to say curriculum is not a monolith. It wasn't for me as a homeschool student. It wasn't for me as a teacher. But I think largely assessment is, and I'm hoping to maybe invite us to imagine how to deconstruct that for a little bit. And one of the challenges, or perhaps one of the few benefits of assessment, perhaps not the way it's done in American public schools, but it gives some evidence that children are receiving adequate and equitable education. And I was thinking of ways to do that differently, which might be something like a capacities approach, a Amartya Sen or Martha Nussbaum capabilities approach, but that invites the kind of divergence that is very hard to measure, and we return to this question. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about least invasive assessments and how you could simultaneously hold that along with the freedom to live a good and happy life.
Yeah, I sort of was trying to touch on it yesterday, and I don't have the full handle on it, but I think one of the mistakes is of separating curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, usually in that order. So first comes curriculum, then you say, how am I going to teach this, or how are the people going to learn this, what's the pedagogical method, let's apply that pedagogical method, and then let's assess, which is very physical science. Okay, but people are not like that. What these big questions, the so-called big questions do is, it rolls all the three of them together. So the example I was giving, maybe many of you heard this example, was that what if an exam question said, you have $200, your grandmother has arthritis in her knees, what's the best weekend holiday that you can buy for her? Use the internet. And maybe say justify the answer or whatever. Now what's happened is that he has not been taught any of this. So he's going to open the internet, he's going to find out what arthritis means, what problem will it cause, okay, so what are the holiday options, does the internet always tell you the truth or does it cheat you sometimes, what's hotels.com, what's bookings.com, what does guest comment mean, How long does it take to travel? Is it better by air or is it better by road, etc.? So you're rolling together a huge amount of curriculum into one single question, which is actually an assessment question. So the exam is teaching. You know, it's a thought, but I think that we could go, at least the age groups that I work with, it seems to work very well.
I'd like to come back to your remark on time. You said we or the research community did not find out what time is. So I think I'm not that much interested in this question, but I'm very much interested in time and education. Let me start with this remark. We used to give for Christmas a lot of presents to our kids and our grandchildren. Many, many presents. Last year, we decided that every child and every grandchild would just get one present. Not because we don't want to give presents, but we decided to give time as a present. Every child and every grandchild gets a certain amount of time, and we use it together to do things. I'm very, very angry with the public school system because, and that's my biggest critics, teachers, it's a generalization, I know, but teachers mostly do not think that time is relevant for children. Time is very, very relevant to children. And they do not take this into account. They think time is disponible, is available for the school. And the teachers can use the time of the kids. They cannot, I think. They're not allowed. There's a right to your own life and to your own time. On the other hand, I think that the success and the greatness of homeschooling is that there are humans who give time. They give time to their kids. And I think that the success also depends on this giving time and having time, because very often you do not see the results, what makes time, but we all know that time is important. And it's hard to measure the results of spending time on kids in education.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few studies on it also, that if you do give time to a child, then it actually improves the quality of their answers to things. Obviously, I think most people cannot spend free time without thought. We think. You cannot stop yourself from thinking. And I think it's very important to give children time to think. It's wonderful to watch children thinking, you know, when they get that little bit of chance. But as you said, school tries its level best so that they don't have that time, because again of its industrial past. The factory worker at the assembly line is not allowed to think. Okay, I mean, what are you going to think about? You just keep doing the same thing. So the school owns your time. So does the employer. Actually, I wouldn't even say it's just for children. It's for us adults as well. The entire work ethic is to take away as much of your time as you possibly can, and then grudgingly give you one Sunday or whatever. And that Sunday, then what happens is that your family will take away all the time you have immediately. So when do you have time where you have nothing else to do except think? And that's my thought on it. And I have a story. The two little American girls, children of friends of mine who were visiting us in England. And on our windowsill, there's a little black statue of the Buddha. So the two little girls said, "What's that?" So I said, "It's a man sitting." So they said, "What is he doing?" So I said, "He is thinking." So they said, "Thinking?" I said, "Yes, thinking." "Oh, so how long will he think?" I said, "He'll think forever." So then we did an experiment. I said, "No, now the two of you, why don't you sit in that same posture and think? Close your eyes and think." and I want to see how long you can think, which turned out to be about 5 seconds. So, I don't know what went through the little brains in that 5 seconds, but it was sort of illustrative of what he's saying, that we forget to think. We forget how to use free time.
I want to bring as many voices as possible into the conversation today. So at this time, I'd like to invite questions from the audience. And if we can have questions, I know everybody wants to tell Sugata where the children are. So I'm sure we can tell him afterwards. But if you have a question and a brief comment, we'd love to hear from you.
I've got question about big questions, about any base you develop or other researchers do, any discussion about it, improvements, so on.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice practical question. I have a good clear answer to that. There is a website called thesschoolinthecloud.org, and you have hundreds of teachers who blog into it about sessions that they've done. Sessions that went well, sessions that didn't go well, everything. And it also cross-references to other teachers' blogs and sites. In there are hundreds and hundreds of these questions, of what question they tried, and they're fascinating. There are questions that children have created, there are questions that teachers have created, and I have lots of favorites in there. One of the child-created questions which I liked, I don't know if I liked it, but I found it strange. The question was, can fish cry? Well, you got me there. I don't think anybody knows. but it's full of that sort of thing, little children's questions. So take a look at that. You'll really enjoy it, even if you don't use it. But you'll enjoy just reading those questions because it does things to your own head.
Yes. Sure. When you were talking about the granny cloud and the fact that they use admiration rather than discipline, what actually jumped out at me was that they don't necessarily have to be knowledgeable of the subject. And in some research of homeschooling populations, that's what we found, is that the education level of the mother or father has no real clear influence on how well the kids do. So I wondered if you could expound upon your research about the fact that the adult present, whether in Granny Cloud or otherwise, doesn't necessarily have to be knowledgeable of the subject.
Oh, absolutely brilliant question there. I wish I had a totally clear answer, but I'll tell you what kinds of suggested answers I have been getting. One is that there are a couple of PhD studies done in India which counters some of this finding, which says that the child's educational achievement is actually correlated strongly with the mother's education. And when I first read it, I remembered this. I said that it shouldn't be. I mean, why should there be this connection? Until I realized we might be missing a tertiary connection. It's not as though the mother being educated, she is imparting her knowledge. It's not that. It's that because she has some education, she encourages education, and therefore the child gets better. So that could be a factor inside, developing country, economically deprived families, that the mother's education will actually affect. But other than that, my results sort of resoundingly say that your being a subject matter expert does not necessarily influence the outcome of a self-organized learning environment result. And I've done it with experiments. I haven't published yet because I don't have big enough data. But, I've had history teachers teach science and science teachers teach history using souls. It's wonderful for school head teachers and school principals. If the history teacher says, I'm feeling sick, I can't come to school today, all she has to say is, what's the big question? Take the question, give it to the science teacher, and say, go and do a soul on it. That's what. So yes, it helps. And if anything, I found that it actually helps if you don't have subject knowledge, provided you tell the children that. They love to hear it. I mean, my group of those 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, if you say that, look what I've been landed with today. Here is the question. I have no idea what it means. They love to hear that, and then they do the grandmother thing. Don't you even understand this much?
Thank you very much. I think the questions have been moving in the direction that I'm pointing. And my question to you, Professor, is where are the adults? If you look at the self-organized learning environments that you've been creating, then you talk about the backward mothers who don't understand what's happening there. But why are they not there with the children? That's my question. And being developed and being educated. The point being that in a great deal of home education, particularly the so-called unschooling movement, the parents do not stand there and teach physics to their children. They become co-learners and learn with the children. And I think this, or why it's particularly important, I think the question is, in the context of countries such as Brazil and other parts of Latin America, where we're trying to raise the society by raising the children, but we're really ditching their parents in the gash bin, saying, okay, we'll wait for you to die and then we'll have the perfect society. Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, after which the organization I represent was named, at the time of the French Revolution already said that my purpose, and many of the teachers here will not know this, the purpose of my life's work is to make home education possible again, because home education will raise the mother, and that will raise the society. So, my question to you, Professor, is where are the adults?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an area that I haven't actually done much work in, and there are many other people who have, on this whole issue of how much of this kind of method is applicable for adult education. Most of the time, my experience is that when the mothers do come into such environments where the children are working, they approach the whole thing from a completely different standpoint. They show very little interest in what the child is doing. Instead, what they will say is, don't you realize you are not getting enough time because this other child is pushing you out and taking all the time? Can't you tell him? And then she'll turn to me and say, you see, this is the problem with your experiment. There is nobody to complain to. You know, she is not getting any time. That sort of thing. So I had to make a rule to say, madam, can you just go out and don't come inside here. So that's one problem. If you try to do the same method with adults, I've tried a few times. The results range from utter failure to utterly ridiculous. I'll give you an example of both. In the rural Indian setting, you try a soul with adults, 30, 40 years old. They just hang around. You ask them a question, they immediately tell you the wrong answer. So you say, that was not the point. The point was you were supposed to research this in groups. So they said, no, but we know the answer. The answer is this. And something like the sun goes around the earth. So you say, but have you researched? He said, no, because we know it. So that's the utter failure. They have no idea what the internet is. They have no interest in the matter. As far as they're all farmers. To the farmer, if the sun continues to go around the earth the way it does, everything's fine. So he doesn't want to know anything more than that. To the other end, England. So a group of adults again, and I talk to them about souls. They listen. I can make out they're interested, but they're not convinced that all this can happen. They think it won't happen. It's not my child. My child, if you don't supervise her, she's going to play games all the time. This is a very common perception, wrong perception. So anyway, so then I said, okay, all of you have tablet phones, right? So yes, of course, all of them have tablet phones. So you spend $300, $400, $500 on it, yes. And I took out an ad, and I said, let's read this ad. It says, Qualcomm Snapdragon octa-core processor running the Lollipop operating system. So you must have understood this absolutely clearly when you chose your phone. So I said, you mean to say that you spent $500 on this phone without understanding a word of what it's saying? For all you know, it's got popcorn inside it. So I'll give you 40 minutes. Use the internet and tell me what this ad means and which model is better. I think it was the Samsung S6 which had just come out. Which is better than which, the iPhone or this? So they got onto that whole thing, and a little soul starts to happen there. Very reluctantly. Oh, I don't know, that's an operating system. Now what's an operating system? This is too much. I don't understand the purpose of this exercise and so on. But in the end, a nice clear answer comes from one lady. So I said, wow, I'm really impressed because who were you working with? And she's saying, well, actually I cheated. So I said, why, what did you do? I called my daughter. She's 14. She told me everything. So that was that's what I meant by saying the answers. It either fails or you end up with a ridiculous situation like this, But so with my limited experience, you can. But maybe you guys, some of you might want to take it on that. How can you bring this kind of self-organizing behavior to adults? Will it work? The other associated question people ask me is, will it work in organizational settings for problem solving? And there I know the answer. It does work. If it's a peer group of, young to middle-aged managers, and you're the boss, you make your problem into a big question. You say, look, I don't know what you should be doing. But what do you think you should be doing if this is what the problem is? Souls work. And you get good quality ownership of, because they've told you. You haven't told them. So those are the two little things I know. But more work.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Guten Morgen. My name is Aloysio. I'm Brazilian. Actually, my question is, again, I'm sorry, for Professor Mitra. I like classic education. Yesterday we had a very interesting presentation, and in which the classic education was shown as an act of love. And I believe a lot in this approach. I like this approach. And I saw your presentation, and there was a sentence in there that made me quite concerned. The sentence was, a future where no one is obsolete. I consider myself as a knowledge lover, and today I'm a homeschooler because I want to transmit, is that English? I want to transmit this passion, this feeling, this love for my children. So a world where no one is obsolete is very strange for me. It goes very, very far beyond my imagination, And the question is, in this future, in this world, where no one is obsolete, in your world, where will be the room for truth, for justice, for love, where will be the room for these things? Forgive me if I did not capture your message, but for me, sound like a almost perfect symbiosis with a man and a machine.
Yes.
Yeah? If there will be no knowing, no knowledge, so the knowledge will be transferred for the machines. I don't know. In this view, the question is, where will be the room for truth?
I get the
Yeah, okay.
I get the question because I mean obviously it's something that I also spend time thinking about, but on the surface, the answers are obvious that if you have this symbiotic creature, the first reaction of people is that's horrible. Let's not have it. But there could be a different way to think of it. Imagine if the Tyrannosaurus Rex looked at the little furry mammals and said, there is a professor who says those things are going to take over. Let's stop it right now. And it stopped it. Then today, this room would have been a lot bigger and you would have all been T-Rexes sitting here. You see what I mean? That what would have appeared to be a great loss to the Tyrannosaurus, that those little rat-like creatures will take over one day and sit in a room discussing education, what appeared to be so sad for them is not very sad for us. We'd say, thank God he didn't realize that. That's how we came to be. So I'm sort of giving you an oblique answer to this, that yes, it seems like terrible, isn't it, that truth, love, justice, beauty, what's going to happen to them? And what if that half man, half internet creature one day will sit in a place similar to this and say, thank God they couldn't do anything about it. I don't know if you get the flavor of what I'm trying to say. We are at a cusp. We are at a cusp, and it's very rare in species to be at a cusp where the change is incredibly large. It's on the knee of the exponent. What is to come will come quickly, and what it thinks about truth and beauty and justice and love may be very different from what you and I think. We will miss it. They may not.
Yes.
Yes, Tim, would you mind?
Meu nome é Gláucia, eu sou professora por formação, sou pedagoga, sou mãe de uma criança de 5 anos e a sua fala me inspira muito.
My name is Gláucia. I'm a mother of a child of 5 years, and I'm a teacher. I'm formed in pedagogy, preschool.
E eu sou muito apaixonada pelo tema avaliação. Tem essa ideia diferente de avaliar do que eu aprendi na faculdade.
I'm passionate about the subject of assessment.
Na época, quando eu era professora,
The time when I was a teacher,
as minhas amigas avaliavam os seus alunos com uma lista de comportamentos.
my friends, my colleagues would assess the students with a list of behavior. Bad behavior, fought with his friends, things like that. And I chose just to observe my students every place in the school. I wrote a little profile of what their children had done in school for their parents. The results was mothers crying about everything they'd read about their children. I got worried about that, and I spoke to my professor at the university. That she said I was doing everything wrong. When I discovered homeschooling, I began to do the same thing with my child. Observing him, watching him learn alone, discovering his own autonomy. And hearing your lecture on a new way of assessing. I cried because there's some that's in me, this new way of assessing. My question is also a request. How could I outline or lay out this new way of assessment? Because it's something I have in me, but I don't know how to teach it to the other parents I help out in homeschooling. And please assess me in my way of...
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no formula, obviously, that I can offer, but I'll bring it back to this issue of rolling assessment, pedagogy, and curriculum together as the only thing that I can think of. So if you were to take a current problem, for example, take some 3 or 4 of your children, maybe your children, some friends' children, and together, have a nice little evening thing and say, let's take the internet and let's find out what is this refugee crisis in Europe, where is it coming from, and why is it there? And spend a whole evening on that. Just keep observing the children. They will talk, but treat them like your equals, because you don't know the answer anyway, neither do they. And then see where the discussion goes. In the process, you would have assessed them. You would have seen the quiet ones, the analytical ones, the data-driven ones, the feeling-driven ones. It will all be evident, just by looking. So that's about as far as I can go. The other thing I'm very curious to know is that when we meet each other's children, we often say things like, oh, she's really become nice. Or her English has really changed. Now, you haven't examined her or done anything, and the little girl feels very good as well. It's usually always positive. How did we do that assessment? There clearly exists a mechanism inside our brains which can assess really quickly with just one look. We haven't been able to capture that. If we could capture it, we would probably solve the assessment problem. Because isn't that what we ultimately want to know? When your son or your daughter walks in for an interview for his first job, there's the interview board sitting there with 50 questions. But I think when he enters through the door, they've already halfway made up their minds just by looking at him. We haven't captured that. And it's a nice psychological puzzle. I'm sure you could get a PhD out of it.
Well, I'm going to conclude our formal session at this time and give you all the opportunity before you go out to lunch to organize into self-organizing learning systems. I'm sure you have conversations and questions and researchers that you might want to engage or certainly want to talk with one another. So thank you very much. Thank you so much to Sugata for giving us this time. Very appreciative of that. And also to our researchers and our panelists for joining us, and thank you so much to the audience for participating in this. So take your time going to lunch then.
In the States, we worry that mechanism is called prejudice.
Sometimes yes, but when we were adolescents, like you say, she's really cool. Where's it coming from?
Yes, but it doesn't only come from a place of wisdom.